Walter, I read your article on immigration numbers, and I was so intrigued by the fact that your father goes way back in this story, and I wanted to hear about his story and then go into the numbers of illegal immigrants that you estimate are here in the United States of America today and that others do as well. The number is shocking. I've heard it before, but I want to hear it straight from the horse's mouth. Tell me about your father.
So my dad actually started his business was called SEI in Harrisonburg, Virginia in the early 90s when I was very little. He started his business there, and it was a technology company really working for the government. So the way that it was designed, as it started to grow, they built the entire modern immigration filing system. So all of the modern filing system that INS used, which now USCIS uses and DHS uses, was all built by my dad. So he built all of the service centers. He built all the filing facilities. He actually built the factory that prints the green cards. So he actually built the Kentucky facility that does that. So all of this stuff was built, the infrastructure around it. And as far as I'm aware, it's all still the same stuff. So it's all of the same equipment. It's all of the same service centers. All of that stuff still being used today.
And when was this?
So he started the company in 1990, or maybe it was late 80s. But he ran the company from then all the way up to 2005 when he sold it.
And he was responsible for actually building the facilities, not just the systems?
Yes. Yeah. So he did all of the wiring. He did all of everything you can think of. I mean, literally standing up the actual facilities themselves, building the facilities themselves. He built them.
How many facilities are there?
So he built 4 regional service centers and the Kentucky facility that actually prints all the green cards. So there was 4 regional service centers at the time, and that handled all of the green card, filing and all of the immigration filing and paperwork for the whole country. And I think that was the total of it. I'd have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that it was 4 total plus the printing facility, plus they ran the mailroom at DC. So
Your father sounds like an extraordinary man because normally people stay within one, maybe 2 lanes, but it sounds like he was a Renaissance man in terms of fulfilling a contract from construction to software, printing, so all the equipment, extraordinary.
oh yeah,
Is he still in it?
but yeah, he is. Yeah, he's still alive. We talked about this actually after that post I put out and kind of went semi-viral. So I wrote an article about it to talk about it because that's something that him and I have talked about for years. The numbers that people give you on immigration are just lies, and they know they're lies, and they've known their lies forever. So it's just been amazing to watch it. Finally, there's actually a real movement in the country to try and get immigration under control. But people need to know what the real numbers are. That's the reality. I mean, they've been lying about it for years.
When it comes to something that is very much controlled, directed, policy is determined by numbers. If you have fake numbers, then every decision, every policy, every law, every action will not be based upon reality and truth.
Exactly. I mean, that's one of the things that bothered me the most about the Biden administration, because they lied about every, not just some numbers, not just part of them. They lied about everything. I mean, from Bureau of Labor statistics to immigration numbers to economy numbers, everything. They lied about every single number you can think of. It was a shocking thing to see.
And frankly, for President Trump and even those within the administration, and you're always hoping that the right guy or gal gets into the relevant departments and agencies that direct these efforts. For instance, you couldn't get much better than Tom Homan
No.
as the czar of deportation, if you will. But you're not going to always hit a home run on that. You can we've seen that for decades. Even Supreme Court appointments have turned out to be actually probably subversively given to the former presidents, and told they represented one ethic and they in fact represented an entirely opposite ethic. So this happens, and I'm concerned about what's happening in commerce, labor, and USCIS, but we can go back to that if we choose to. Let's walk through your father's role and sort of the history, because his story as to when it began, what they were thinking at the time, was it did it derive from a law, a bill that had been passed? And what was his directive, and what did he actually do? We know about the buildings, we know about the infrastructure, but walk us through how it all fell out.
So the green card facilities is what the primary focus of this was. The green card technology was new. And, I had initially put out that he had designed the green card. That's not fully accurate. What he did is he actually completed it. They had a very high failure rate keeping those secure green cards, the technology on them. They had something like a 40 or 50% fail rate when they first designed it. And it was designed by an INS engineer. And what he did is make it actually function so that it had about a 5% fail rate.
When you say fail rate, do you mean fraud?
For actually getting a secure registry with it. So if it doesn't work and doesn't actually register properly, then it's not a secure card anymore. It doesn't work within the system.
Is that for scanning or
scanning,
like the number and all that, so that you end up with a database that corresponds to the actual number and person that is being issued the card?
Yes, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So the facilities and all the stuff that he built was entirely based around what they were doing with green cards at the time. So that was they were trying to develop a new version of the green card, how it was going to operate, the modern version of it, what you see today. That's what it was all based around. That's where the facilities came from. They needed, all of the filing for those cards. They needed the printing facility for those cards. That's what he developed and designed. That's what the history of the company as it grew. And he just took those contracts on and started building all of that stuff out for the.
And everything was computerized from the point that he began, or was it computerized beforehand?
I think that I'm not entirely sure of, because that would have been prior to my memory. My memory was as he's starting to actually grow the company out, right? So it was, from building in the facilities all the way through the point where they were printing, 1 million green cards a year is what I remember. So prior to that, I don't know if anything was digitized or, how it was set up. I know that the filing system itself, the way it's designed now is that, all immigration filing has a barcode on it. That corresponds with every part of your digital footprint. The government just scans the barcode. That's how they file the barcodes. They file everything with that, and you've got it all stored within immigration filing facilities all over the country.
And do those facilities and those cards, do they expand out from the green card, which is the starting point for your father, to include cards for temporary guest workers, people here on very
that would all be the paperwork, and that was all handled. So all immigration paperwork was a part of that system. Now that's not specific to the green card, but all of the filing facilities would have had all of the immigration paper,
including visas.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a real bonus for me, because I've wanted to talk to somebody who actually knew about the logistics behind the scenes, and which may not sound, dear viewer, like the most exciting thing to be chatting about right now. We're going to get to numbers that are going to blow your mind soon. But I think fully understanding the logistics and the record keeping, the databases, and how they interact with perhaps other databases, and we can talk about Palantir later, is very important to understand why we don't get the numbers that we're supposed to get. So we'll get there. But you're saying that these 4 large facilities plus the printing facility, the 4 large facilities is intaking all of the records and processing them. They obviously have to go into a database. Do you know if it's one database where every record just is noted what the status is, whether it's a green card or a visa holder for a temporary work or...
That I'm not entirely sure of. I could ask him that specific question, and I can get you an answer on that.
Yeah.
But I'm not entirely sure if it's one single database. I know that he did develop a lot of the databases that it all operates in. I know that. But I'm not entirely sure if it's one singular database that it, keeps and logs everything for immigration. I can assume that it probably would be, but I don't know. I don't know that very specifically.
The assumption would be based upon something that would make sense. Because what I have found, one of the most alarming things that I found is that you're often reading articles by experts in the field of immigration or journalists who are interviewing experts, and the line will invariably be in there, well, it's impossible or very, very difficult to tease out these numbers or come to a final bottom line on any of these numbers because of the way the data is kept, or that they're not integrated, or these are the most recent numbers and it's, 2020 or 2019. And they don't record, or at least they don't release this information that would give us real-time accurate numbers in each category. It is seemingly deliberate or incompetent to be unable in a database to just do a sort on, say, H-1B or F-1 or H-1 and be able to come up with, as of this date, this is exactly the number of persons. And you should be able to sort by or filter by state, the number in every state, like what company they're working for, if they've got family with it. It seems like all of those records would be integrated and searchable, sortable, etc., and you'd always have a current update. But that's not what I find. Do you know why that is?
That I don't know why it is publicly, but I'll tell you right now that anything that's illegal immigration, all of that stuff is there. They have that data. So they have it. They know what it is. I mean, that's part of the whole reason I wrote the article after that post got so much attention, because they knew what the numbers were in 2003. They knew what this stuff was going. They knew how many people had visas. They knew how many people had this. They knew how many green cards they were printing. They knew all of it. They know that. So the numbers that they released, which is what's shocking to me, is if you go back and look at the publicly released information, they've been saying the same thing for 20 years.
11 million. 11 million. I started wondering about that a decade ago. Why is it that this number doesn't grow? It doesn't make sense. And then I can't pinpoint the persons or persons unknown that I would read an article, or I didn't used to be on social media until about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, so it wasn't social media, but I would hear someone speak, well, no, we think the number, not a government person, but the number is most emphatically 40, 50 million people of illegals. And I'd say, I mean, I can hear the ring of truth and confidence. And I'd still question myself, why can't we know this? Why would somebody be saying that? Why wouldn't we know the exact figure? But they knew, because they're parroting or agreeing with exactly what you're saying, that the numbers are that high or higher.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the only person I've seen that with a large public media presence that's ever said what I thought was close to the numbers was actually Ann Coulter. Ann Coulter, 2015, in her book, she said it was 30 million then. He was dead on.
Yeah.
She was dead on. She was the only person, too. And I told everybody, I said, she's right. She is absolutely accurate with her numbers there. And everyone was like, no, it's 11 million. 11 million. It's been 11 million since 1995, but
I'm sure I probably did hear from Ann Coulter, but I know that I heard from other people. But just because somebody utters it once in an interview or it's alluded to by somebody else doesn't mean it ever reaches the consciousness of mainstream America or is any threat to those who are suppressing that information? Because it's just, a colleague of your father's. It could have been your father that said something in an interview.
Oh, him and I have been saying this stuff for years. He's the one that told me, and we were the ones that sat down a few years ago. I can't remember how many years ago it was now, and we came up with that 50 million number in a conversation. We were trying to determine what it must be underneath Biden, and we came to that 50 million number just in that
Well, let's go back to, I've touched on this very obvious inadequacy in the reporting, and we're seeing this, by the way, since President Trump took office in this term. The Department of Labor, I believe it is, their database, they have started, I wouldn't say call it scrubbing as much as removing some of the key pieces of data that were there only a few months before. Data that allows you to track certain and very important metrics, and from which you can actually take companies to court because you can prove that they are defrauding the system with regard to hiring H-1Bs and perms, green cards. So there's a problem in this administration, and I know for sure that it is not because Trump is part of that, and obviously Steve Miller and others. It's somebody within the department still that's playing that game.
Well, the only thing I would counter that with is it's very possible that the Trump administration, as they're going back and looking at the numbers, because I know that their scrutiny on immigration is so high, and it's his number one issue. So my assumption actually would probably be that the reason they would be going back and doing that is because they know that the numbers, and they need to go do them again. I mean, you got to think about how many things they lied about, how many statistics and how many things they did, how many studies they completely and totally lied about. I wouldn't be surprised if they were ordered to go back and redo everything, redo it all so they can get a real picture. Because my guess is if you came into as the Trump administration coming in, you said, okay, we need to do mass deportations. How many illegals are actually here? That my guess is that the response from the bureaucratic agencies would be, we don't want to tell you. That would be my guess. And so any of those numbers that they did, if they wouldn't looked at them, they said, well, these are the only numbers. My guess is that they would be lying. That's what my assumption is. So if they're doing a full review, I wouldn't be surprised if they're changing data or they're removing data so they can go look at it again and make sure it's accurate.
This is a different situation as with hiring for perm, where the filing by the company that wants to hire green card or perm immigrants has to prove that they have offered the job to an American. H-1B will not have to offer the job to an American, astonishingly, but for perm you do. And what they do is they actually alter the whole system so that they can hide the fact that they never really offered it to an American. And that's some of the data. So just a heads up, they are hiding, but it's not from Trump. I know that for a fact. Because we've had some of, this is my reporter that's done this work, and we've had the administration reach out to her on that, finding out this information. Yeah. So, but as far as the numbers are concerned, you're saying that they are there. And when your father came in, did they have at that point, what year was this that he started?
Which year?
The year that he started work.
Oh, he started in the early 90s.
Okay. And when
that would have been the early 90s, probably 94, 95.
So this was after the Reagan amnesty in 86. So they had already amnestied everybody who was here from before 1982 and before. So the numbers, I don't know if that's being taken into account, but it seems to me that if you're looking at those numbers at that point, there was amnesty given. I don't know. I'm sure it was very, very broad. I don't know if it didn't include a few years, the most recent, say, 4 years. But at that point, who asked the question? Why was the question asked? And how was your father involved in coming up with the answer, or who did come up with the answer at that time?
So you're talking about the numbers that when they came to that 23, 28 million, is that what you're talking?
Yes, the earliest numbers well, actually, I read a couple of articles. I read yours. I I may be confusing two different posts or two different articles. I saw where there was an earlier estimate, and what I wanted you to do is start back. And I don't know, maybe you all weren't involved. Maybe your father wasn't involved with the earlier estimate, but it seemed to me that there was an earlier estimate, and now that you've gone back with your father to compile your most recent estimate of 50 million or thereabouts. Did he have a number early on when he began working with them, or how did he come to the conclusion that the numbers weren't correct?
Okay, so that's what the centerpiece of that whole article that I wrote was about, because the reason, so they didn't have a number at the time when they asked to create that number. That number specifically, the 23 to 28 million estimate, 2003, that was done specifically because Bush at that time was trying to push for a new version of a secure work permit, essentially. It was not a green card. It wasn't a permanent residence thing. It was a new style of secure work permit that was going to use the same technology as the green card. So to do that, the Bush administration was pushing that policy throughout immigration and INS, and they were trying to figure out how to do that. So to do that, they needed to sit down and figure out, well, how many cards do we need to print if we want to do that? So that's where the numbers came from. They were at a meeting, and all of the INS officials, along with my dad and his team, were sitting there, and they sat there and tried to figure out how many illegals were in the country. And that's where the numbers came from. So this wasn't some public, big survey that they did. This was top INS officials all sitting around together, trying to come up with what they needed to do logistically to be able to meet the demands of this new work permit thing, which never ended up materializing because the work permit itself, it got killed on Capitol Hill. It just didn't make it. The time constraints were too much. It just didn't make it through. So they didn't end up having to do it. But the numbers themselves were generated by a team of top INS people, all trying to figure out what they would have to do to logistically. So essentially what they were saying is they would have to essentially stand up 4 new service centers and a new printing facility, because the green card facility was working 3 shifts a day. So they were working at full capacity. They couldn't do anything else. So they had to rebuild all of the facilities, and it was going to take something along of a decade to be able to stand up what they wanted. So that's where the numbers came from. They weren't, this wasn't some public release or some data that they were trying to figure out. That was the internal INS discussion trying to come up with numbers.
Well, when you say internal, this is what I was thinking just prior to that. The fact that it's internal, it's behind closed doors. They weren't doing this to make a political statement. These were men and women sitting at a conference table in a meeting room, and they were sincerely trying to determine an accurate number so that they could assess how they would build out a program, what it would take.
Exactly.
And so these are numbers that would have the highest credibility because they weren't out there on the floor of the Senate or in front of a podium speaking to the American people. And so in 2003, they came up with 23 to 28 million as a baseline.
Yep. That's the number that they landed on. The number itself was generated, just as you said. It's not some political statement, which is why we know that's why we think that they're the most accurate, because that wasn't something that people were supposed to know about. That was, what do we need to do to meet the demands of a contract? If we were going to sign a contract to build out facilities to be able to do this, what do we need? Well, that's the number they came up with, 23 to 28 million. And by the way, they weren't even intentionally trying to make it so that what they needed to do to print 28 million green cards, they were going to estimate that not green cards, new work permits. What they were doing was they were saying, okay, so there's 23 to 28. We figure a third of those people would probably end up getting this new secure work permit. So that's what they were trying to fill. They were trying to that's what, yep.
They thought at the time only a third of them would get the work permit.
Yes.
Now, is it 28 million, 23 to 28 million? Is that number including family members? I mean, is that everybody, including, say, a 14-year-old minor or someone who was born in the United States? Maybe you don't know that number. I mean,
This was specifically going after what they believed to be illegal immigrants in the country. So what that number would be total, and they figure a third of that number would be the people that would be able to get that secure work permit, was the idea.
as
So
work.
go
Go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say no. You go to. Yeah, okay. That number represents illegals at the time in 2003. And Bush was pushing a secure, what was it called? A work card?
It was a secure work permit. So it was like, it was using the same technology as the green card. That was the idea. That's why they were doing this. This meeting was held on the first.
Right. And the purpose of the work permit is that what was his intention to then say to all the illegals in the country, look, we know you're here. We want to give you a work permit whereby you could actually legally, even though you're illegal, he wasn't going for amnesty, right? He was not going for amnesty.
Yeah, not an amnesty plan.
And it wasn't a mass naturalization or some crazy plan like that. But he wanted to then make it at least above board. Everybody's got this card. They can at least produce this. We know they're not here legally, but now would that have translated to sort of the federal government putting a blessing on them being in the country? And would it make them sort of legal in a sense? I don't know if you know this. I'm probing where.
Well, that would be what my assumption is. So the conversations that I've had about this specific issue is that the idea was that it was a secure work permit, similar to that of a green card, but it's not a permanent resident thing, but it would allow them. I think the idea was that it was going to allow them to be able to transition around and move and do different work in different states. So it's a secure work permit. They could have gone to multiple states. So my guess is, even though they didn't say it, and if you read what Bush was talking about at the time, he didn't specifically say this, but my guess is it was just another back-ended way towards amnesty, really. I mean, just a permanent status, essentially.
Mm-hmm. And what the benefit to the worker is that they can sort of come out of the shadows, right? They don't have to buy fake Social Security cards, Social Security numbers. They don't have to buy fake driver's licenses, and then to the benefit of the American people and the government, they could be managed, and it's documented. It's a documentation. He may have been going for a work visa, because I remember at the time that he was going for allowing much more traffic into the United States for work visas. I think the mantra at that time was, it doesn't have to be immigration where they become eventually citizens, but they're here to work. Let them be here on that status.
Right. So essentially it was like a temporary work visa, but it was supposed to be a secure style work visa it was a bigger version of the H-1B, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to go back and read specifically what it was. I did find something. I think I linked it in the article. I read it at the time when I published it. So I did link it within the article. He presented it to Congress at the end of that term in 2004. But he had already been pushing the policy throughout immigration for at least a year or two before that.
I almost think, other than that back-end amnesty thing, that it would have been, at the time I wasn't really excited about the idea of this immigration, because I'm firmly of the belief, because the numbers are there, that we have far more temporary guest workers than we have jobs right now. Americans can't find jobs. And so I don't want them here just merely because I want my fellow Americans to be employed. That's my priority, Americans first. But at least if they had been given these cars and this whole system had been up, if we could have dodged the bullet of some grand amnesty plan, which probably wasn't possible, we would have at least had this system where the number and the counting of it would have been much more transparent to the American people, and identifying and finding those people when need be would have been probably easier as well.
Probably. And I think if you look at it, the Trump administration is pushing documentation for all illegals now. So that's something they have on the table currently. If I'm not mistaken, they're trying to make it so that if you're here illegally, you have to have some form of paperwork. And if you don't, they'll deport you. So
Well,
I mean, I'm not surprised.
yeah. So this would be, I know we're spending a lot of time on the background here on Bush, right? But this would have probably been some kind of new visa, new guest worker visa, because they have, say, the H-1, which is for temporary or seasonal agricultural work, and the H-2, which is for seasonal non-agricultural, and then there's the H-1B, and there's the blah, 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 blah. There's a whole alphabet of them. But what we'd be looking at probably is this transition. Maybe they call it the X one
Right.
visa.
Yeah.
And so everybody would come in under this visa and we would have had the numbers, but all that fell apart. So they're sitting in the room. Was your father, then was he still there when they came to, or they produced that number of 23 to 28 million?
Yes, he was in the room.
He was in the room with them. Sorry.
Yep.
I'm trying to juggle timelines and the numbers.
Yeah, firsthand information on that. So he has direct knowledge of the people that were in the room, and he didn't want to release that, but he does know he was there. I mean, he sat in the room as they came up with it. And the reason that he was there is because he was the only one that would have known what was required to build the systems that they needed to be able to fill that out. That's why he was there, because he had just finished building all of the green card facilities, all of the filing facilities all over the country. He was the best person in the best position to understand what they needed to do if they were going to fill that new ID.
Makes sense. And of course, if I asked you, did your father have a secret recording of that meeting? The answer was
no. Unfortunately, I don't think back then everybody had an iPhone.
I know. I was just thinking,
I think that's the BlackBerry era right then, I think.
it definitely was. It was definitely that. Now, how does the volume of legal green cards, how does that work in? Because I see that you make the statement, a figure that matches the annual volume of legal green cards my father's shop produced. Are you saying that the number of legals coming in is roughly at the time, and maybe perhaps still today, corresponding to the number of illegals?
That's what the INS people thought. They figured that the number of illegals that were entering the country roughly equaled the same amount of people that were coming in. Illegals coming in were roughly equal to the legal. So it was 1 for 1 is what they essentially were coming to. And they were producing roughly 1 million or 1.2 million green cards per year. So that's where that's where the numbers, as it progresses forward, that's where we got that number.
Does everybody on a visa get a card?
Not every. I mean, I know some people, they say that someone was actually talking to me about this after I published this article. They were saying that, I've got people that, they've been waiting 20 years for their green card. So.
No, but I mean, besides green card, like if I was here on the H-1B visa, would I have a card that goes with that?
And that I don't think so, no. You don't get a green card. Now, a permanent resident, I don't.
No, I mean, it could be purple. It could be chartreuse, but.
That, I am not sure on that. I don't think so, though. I don't think that's the case because.
Crazy. Because, yeah. I'm sorry, let me just go with this thought for a moment. I've wondered about this. Maybe your dad will know the answer to this as well. But it seems